Hello everyone. Before we begin, I'd love to know, where are you listening from tonight? And what time is it there? Now, close your eyes and listen closely to It was the spring of 1895 when I was first introduced to the most curious and sinister of all Holmes's private cases, one which, by his own admission, tested the very limits of his deductive art. The affair began, as so many did, with a letter slid beneath the door of 221B, Baker Street in the early hours of morning, bearing neither a seal nor return address, only the crisp scent of expensive tobacco and a whisper of perfume that even Holmes, with all his talents, could not at first identify. I had returned from an early appointment with a patient and found Holmes seated cross-legged upon the hearthrug, his violin across his knees and a half-filled syringe resting beside a saucer of salt. I paused, both relieved and wary, knowing that his descent into the 7% solution often marked the onset of an intellectual drought. But this morning, he seemed alert, his eyes sharp, fingers steady. "You're early," I said, taking my chair. He lifted the envelope without a word and passed it to me. The handwriting was feminine, deliberate, and aristocratic. The ink a deep sapphire blue. I opened it and read, "Mr. Holmes, a man is dead, and another will follow. No authorities must be involved. I will call upon you at precisely 10 minutes past 10 a.m." Holmes spoke for the first time. "The paper is of a rare type. Cotton-based, imported from Naples. The ink, proprietary, sold only at Morley's on Regent Street. The scent? A blend of bergamot, white musk, and cardamom. Unmistakably tailored. A perfumer's blend. Better. A fashion house's signature." He stood and crossed to the bookcase, retrieving a slim volume bound in crocodile skin. "Ah, yes," he muttered. "Alexandre Moreau. The Parisian couturier, now operating under A.M. of Savile Row. Known for his eccentricity, exorbitant prices, and, most of all, his secrecy. A fashion designer," I said, raising an eyebrow. "Hardly your usual clientele." "On the contrary," Holmes replied. "The business of fashion is not far removed from that of crime, Watson. Both rely on deception, spectacle, and the precise concealment of truth. At exactly 10:10 a.m., a hansom cab pulled up outside, and moments later, a soft knock sounded on the door. "Mrs. Hudson announced, a Mademoiselle Delacroix to see you, Mr. Holmes." The woman who entered was not dressed as a customer of Savile Row, but a muse of its creation. She wore a coat of deepest violet trimmed with sable, a hat adorned with jet feathers, and gloves so tight one could see the delicate bones of her fingers. Her face, though veiled, bore an expression of poised dread. Holmes rose and bowed slightly. "Mademoiselle Delacroix, I presume?" She nodded. "I am Alexandre Moreau's chief assistant. And yesterday morning, I discovered his body." I felt a jolt of surprise. Holmes didn't move. You found him dead? Yes. In his private atelier, behind the showroom. The door was locked from within. No windows, no means of escape. His body was slumped beside a half-finished gown. No wounds. No sign of struggle. Only, she faltered. Only? She drew a long breath. A snake curled upon the floor beside him. Dead as well. At this, Holmes's eyes flared with interest. Indeed. A snake. How charmingly theatrical. I thought, perhaps, he had been bitten. But the physician who examined him found no puncture. No venom. Nothing. Where is the body now? Removed. To his family crypt in Montmartre. But the atelier remains untouched. At least until tomorrow, when the trustees take over. Holmes tapped his fingers together. You said another will die? Her voice dropped to a whisper. Yes. The same message was delivered to the workshop this morning. Scrawled in chalk on the mirror where he used to inspect his creations. 3 words, one of 2. Within the hour, we found ourselves on the cobbled stretch of Savile Row, standing before the formidable edifice of A.M. of Savile Row, the premier men's fashion house in London. The building itself was more fortress than boutique. Grey stone, narrow windows, black ironwork framing the double doors. Holmes entered without hesitation, Mademoiselle de la Croix guiding us past astonished staff into the inner sanctum. The atelier was a marvel. Dozens of mannequins stood at attention like silent witnesses, each clothed in extraordinary garments, velvet jackets with serpent-scale patterns, trousers of emerald silk, coats of plum, obsidian, and ivory. But all eyes turned to the far end of the room. There stood a single chair, overturned. A spool of crimson thread lay unspooled across the floor. A dressmaker's form bore a half-finished evening gown of shimmering silver. And beside it, beneath a red drop cloth, an outline of where a man had fallen. Holmes examined the area silently. Then, with sudden intensity, he turned to Delacroix. You say the door was locked. Who had keys? Only Moreau, myself, and she hesitated. And she sighed. His protégé, a young man named Felix Greaves. He was Moreau's apprentice and rival. Felix Greaves was located promptly at his flat on Marylebone Lane. He was a striking young man with hair the color of flax and eyes as pale as ice. He answered our inquiries with indifference, which Holmes disliked immediately. Moreau was a genius, Greaves said, but also a tyrant. He accused me, just days ago, of copying one of his designs and threatened to have me expelled from the guild. You bear no grief? I asked. I bear no lies, he replied coolly. Holmes's voice was soft but edged. And where were you at the hour of Moreau's death? I was with Mademoiselle Delacroix, he said without hesitation. I looked at her. She said nothing. Holmes narrowed his eyes. How convenient. Back at Baker Street, Holmes examined a scale from the dead serpent Delacroix had retrieved in a silk pouch. He subjected it to flame, acid, and a microscope. At last, he smiled. This, he said, is not a snake. Or at least, not a natural one. He held up the scale. Do you see? Too rigid. Too uniform. This was manufactured. A fake snake. A mechanical one. But why? Holmes leaned back. To simulate fear. To create the illusion of death without actual violence. You see, Watson, the snake is not the weapon. It is the warning. And the killer. Holmes paced across the rug at 221B, Baker Street with such ferocity that I feared the pattern might wear through. The mechanical serpent scale rested beneath his magnifying lens, beside a pile of documents and sketches sent over by Mademoiselle Delacroix at his request. You believe the snake was not the method of death, I said. Then what was? Holmes gestured to a design sketch before him. This, he said, is Moreau's final commission, an exclusive tuxedo for the Duke of Norbridge's spring gala. But look, see this hidden fold in the collar lining? This isn't just fashion. It's concealment. For what? A mechanism, perhaps. Or a poison capsule. Or something worse. But here's what bothers me most. Felix Greaves lied. He claimed an alibi. He said he was with Mademoiselle Delacroix. Holmes gave a wry smile. And Mademoiselle did not confirm it. Did you notice? I did. He pointed at the envelope that had first summoned us. And why summon us if Greaves could be blamed so easily? No, Watson, Delacroix wants truth, not justice. And truth is always tangled. Holmes arranged a meeting with the Duke of Norbridge, a tall and haughty man who considered every second of his day a wasted expense unless spent on politics or polo. We met him in his private box at the Ascot grounds. The suit, he said dismissively. Yes, Moreau was crafting one for me. Ridiculously expensive. I was told it would arrive by courier the day before the gala, but of course the man dropped dead before he could finish. You didn't retrieve a design? Holmes asked. Certainly not. His atelier was locked up by the trustees before I could inquire. I had no desire to rifle through the man's wardrobe. Holmes was thoughtful. And yet someone has. He handed the Duke a small swatch of fabric, white silk with an unusual inlay pattern. This was found in a rubbish bin 2 streets away from Moreau's studio. Recognize it. The Duke paled. That's my collar fabric. I selected it personally. Holmes nodded. Then someone took the suit before the trustees arrived. And whoever has it, intended for it to be seen. That evening, Holmes and I returned to Savile Row, this time entering not through the front, but via a small alley that ran behind the Row's historic buildings. Holmes produced a set of thin iron tools, and within moments, we were through the side door of Moreau's workshop. The air smelled of cedar and dust. "Observe," Holmes whispered, pointing to a full-length mirror at the far end. There, faint but visible beneath the angled gaslight, were 3 new words etched in chalk, 2 of 2. A tremor passed through me. Another death. Holmes shook his head. No. This is a count. The first message read a 1 of 2, a warning. This is a completion. He began searching the room, pulling back bolts of fabric, overturning dress forms, studying Moreau's measurements and sketches. And then he paused at a locked chest beneath the cutting table. "Watson," he said, "lend me your knife." With a deft motion, he pried open the lid. Inside were dozens of small leather-bound notebooks, each marked only with a number. Holmes flipped to the first page of one at random. It was written in cipher. "A tailor's code," Holmes muttered. "Short-handed, encrypted, a private ledger." Let's see if he kept track of his secrets as well as his stitches. By morning, Holmes had cracked the cipher. The entries revealed a shocking pattern. Moreau had served several unofficial clients, many under false names. A few, however, he listed plainly. One stood out. A. Delacroix, special request, venom lining. Holmes frowned. Venom lining? Surely that's not literal, I said. I'm no longer certain what is, Holmes replied grimly. We summoned Mademoiselle Delacroix back to Baker Street. She arrived within the hour, dressed this time in all black, her gloves stitched with silver. Holmes was blunt. You commissioned a suit with a venom lining. Explain. She stiffened. It was a hypothetical design. An experiment. One of Moreau's many. I requested a model that could incorporate an anesthetic capsule in the lining, intended for military interest. That was all. Military. I was engaged briefly by the War Office in designs for covert operatives. You may confirm it, if you like. And the mechanical snake. That was Felix's idea, she said. Part of the same pitch. Distraction, not danger. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Yet your name is on the ledger. She looked down. I never thought it would be used. That night, we received a message by courier. It was addressed to Holmes, and marked with a simple symbol, a coiled serpent consuming its tail. Inside was a photograph. It showed a man standing before the mirror in Moreau's atelier. His face was blurred, motion caught mid-step, but his clothing was unmistakable, the unfinished tuxedo meant for the Duke. What does this mean? I asked. Holmes traced the inked edge of the photo. It means the suit wasn't just stolen, it was worn. Photographed. Displayed. Like a message. A message to whom? To anyone who can read the signs, Holmes said. This is theatre, Watson. And the killer is still performing. The Duke of Norbridge's spring gala loomed on the horizon, despite the ongoing investigation. Holmes insisted we attend. It's not about the Duke anymore, he told me. It's about what the killer wants seen. We arrived at the Norbridge estate, where carriages lined the circular drive and gentlemen in bespoke suits smoked cigars beneath gaslit lanterns. Inside, violins played and champagne flowed. But Holmes ignored it all. He moved from guest to guest, eyeing lapels, collars, cufflinks. Then he stopped. There, he said. Across the ballroom, a man in a perfectly tailored tuxedo with gleaming white silk collar stood alone, sipping champagne. His hair was light. His shoulders trim. His eyes. Felix Greaves, I whispered. Holmes nodded. We approached him together. Evening, Mr. Greaves, Holmes said. Fine suit you have there. Greaves smiled. Yes. A parting gift from the master. But not meant for you. Greaves shrugged. He wouldn't have finished it anyway. And the serpent. I thought you'd appreciate the drama. Holmes stepped forward. Did you kill him? Greaves's smile faded. No, he said. I only finished what he started. Then he raised his glass. And dropped it. The champagne flute shattered on the marble floor. Felix Greaves stood frozen, his expression contorted not with fear, but pain. His pupils dilated rapidly. He clutched at his chest, stumbled back a step, and then collapsed amid the murmurs of the crowd, who formed a circle around him as though in morbid ritual. I pushed through and knelt at once. Poison, I said. Fast acting. Holmes crouched beside me, already examining Greaves's cuff and collar. Contact poison, he muttered. Absorbed through the skin. Most likely brushed onto the lining. A footman rushed over, breathless. Shall I summon a physician? Holmes didn't look up. He's already gone, I said softly, checking for a pulse I knew wouldn't return. Holmes stood and turned to the stunned Duke of Norbridge. Lock the estate. No one leaves until the authorities arrive. But I thought, the Duke began. Holmes cut him off. Unless you wish to host another corpse before midnight, I suggest you obey. Back at Baker Street later that night, Holmes stripped his gloves off and poured himself a scotch. 2 dead, I said. Both connected to that suit. Not just connected, Holmes murmured. Claimed by it. I frowned. Do you believe the suit is rigged somehow? Almost certainly. Moreau's notes referenced type for mirror lining application. The poison was embedded directly in the hem, a thin powder derived from the belladonna plant, possibly laced with cyanide for immediacy. Only activated by body heat. He paused. But that's not the whole story. I leaned forward. What do you mean? Greaves may have worn the suit. But he didn't prepare it. Someone knew he would. Someone wanted him to. Holmes lit his pipe and exhaled a long stream of smoke. And I believe they left us a signature. He reached into his coat and withdrew the broken wineglass from the gala, wrapped carefully in a silk kerchief. Etched along its stem, barely visible, were 3 tiny letters AMD. Delacroix. Again we summoned Mademoiselle Delacroix once more. She arrived pale, breath tight, her composure beginning to erode. You knew Greaves would wear the suit, Holmes said without preamble. And you knew he'd die if he did. She stared at the floor. No, she whispered. I think you did. You just didn't realize the suit had already been prepared. You assumed the poison capsule was theoretical, until you saw him wearing it. I never. Holmes held up the glass stem. Your initials. On the wineglass. She paled. Yes. I had it made weeks ago. A birthday present for Moreau. Holmes stepped closer. You loved him. Tears welled in her eyes. I did. And Greaves. Her voice cracked. He hated Moreau. But he was brilliant. And I was weak. Did he kill Moreau? No, she said. I don't believe he did. He wanted to. But he was too proud. He believed Moreau would destroy himself. And, in a way, he did. Holmes studied her. Then he said, I don't think this is about love or rivalry. I think it's about legacy. Holmes insisted we return once more to the atelier. This time, he said, we go below. He led me down a narrow flight of stairs at the rear of Moreau's studio, down into what had once been a wine cellar. It had been repurposed. Rows of mannequins lined the walls like silent sentries. Drawers brimmed with fabric samples and spools of rare thread. And at the very back, a vault. Holmes picked the lock. Inside were 3 metal trunks. He opened the first and inhaled sharply. Inside lay dozens of garments, cloaks, jackets, gloves, and trousers, all made with hidden compartments, reinforced stitching, sewn-in devices. A miniature revolver was stitched into a sleeve. A mirror sewn into a cuff. A blade tucked into a coat lapel. Good heavens, I breathed. This isn't fashion. It's espionage. Holmes nodded. Welcome to Moreau's real business. As we emerged, Mademoiselle Delacroix was waiting outside the studio, her expression grim. "They found another message," she said quietly. We followed her to the rear mirror, the same one where the earlier chalk phrases had been scrawled. Now, new words shimmered across the glass, written in gold ink. "The suit is the signature." Holmes stepped forward. "So the killer has turned designer. What does it mean?" I asked. Holmes's voice was low. "It means they're not finished. And the final piece is already on its way." 2 days later, Holmes received an anonymous parcel at Baker Street. It contained a suit. Beautifully made. Midnight blue, with pearl buttons and a subtle silver lining. No note. No label. Holmes examined it without touching it directly, using tweezers and gloved fingers. And then he found it. Inside the inner pocket, sewn into the hem, was a folded slip of paper. He unfolded it carefully. One word, "Next." Holmes stood at the window of our Baker Street apartment, gazing out into the misty morning with the unopened midnight blue suit draped across a chair behind him. 3 deaths, I said, and 1 suit that's traveled like a curse. Holmes didn't move. "And now," I continued, "someone wants you to wear it." He turned slowly. "Not me, Watson." "You." I stood stunned. "Don't be absurd," I said. "You can't possibly." Holmes held up a hand. "Calm yourself. I would no sooner put you in danger than I would leap into the Thames wearing lead boots. But the message was addressed to me. Which means the killer expects a response. And that gives us power." I stared at the suit. "You think it's a challenge. I think it's a performance. And we've reached the 3rd act. After hours of chemical tests and fiber analysis, Holmes identified something unusual in the thread of the new garment. "The stitching," he said, "contains a resin compound. Non-reactive. Until warmed." He placed the jacket beneath a heated lamp. Within seconds, faint letters appeared along the hem. I leaned in. "Property of H. Klein." "I've never heard the name," I said. "You wouldn't," Holmes replied. "But I have." He retrieved a file from his archives, an old, thin dossier with the name of Klein, Heinrichs scrawled across the cover. Who was he? A German tailor, turned informant. Operated in London under a false name. He disappeared 12 years ago. Believed murdered by a foreign agent. And he worked with Moreau. Helped design garments for covert operations. But Klein had enemies. Holmes closed the file slowly. And one of them is back. Late that evening, a telegram arrived, unsigned. If you want the truth, come to Ashbourne Station. Track 6. Midnight. It was obvious bait. Holmes didn't hesitate. We arrived at the derelict station, long since shuttered and forgotten, a place where even the fog seemed afraid to settle. Track 6 was empty but for a rusted carriage and a flickering lantern. And there, sitting alone on a crate, was a man in a three-piece suit, hands gloved, face hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. He did not rise as we approached. "Sherlock Holmes," he said, voice soft, accent hard to place. "You summoned me," Holmes replied. "I only lit the beacon," the man said. "The hand that moved the pieces lies further east." "And your name?" The man pulled off his glove. His hand bore the mark of a long-healed burn, twisted like melted wax. "H. Klein," I whispered. Holmes's eyes never left the man's. "You're supposed to be dead." I was. But death is only an absence of voice, not intention. He reached into his coat and withdrew a photograph, grainy, old, but unmistakable. It showed Heinrich Klein and Louis Moreau, side by side in a Parisian studio, arms over each other's shoulders. "He was my friend," Klein said. "And he was murdered." "By whom?" Holmes asked. Klein looked up. "By the one you seek." Klein's story poured forth like wine uncorked too long. "There was a third," he said. "Not just me and Moreau. A third tailor. One who learned everything we did and turned it into killing. He called himself Bedtime. A code name. A ghost. What became of him?" Holmes asked. "He vanished. But he's returned. He must have. No one else would know our codes, our stitches, our methods. And the suit. His signature." Klein pulled back his coat collar, revealing a small stitched sigil, an Ouroboros. "The serpent eating its tail," I murmured. "The sign of Vespertine," Klein said. Holmes's voice was cold. "Then he's mocking us. Using your secrets against you." "Not just me," Klein replied. "He's using all of us. Moreau, Greaves, Delacroix." Holmes looked out across the fog-laced track. "Where would he go now?" Klein answered without hesitation. "He'd return to the beginning." We traveled to Paris 2 days later. Holmes had secured access to the archives beneath the École des Métiers, where Moreau, Klein, and Vespertine had first trained together as apprentices. The records were meticulous. Names, sketches, clients, and innovations, each page carefully preserved. And then, we found it, an early commission bearing the mark of all three tailors. Client, Henri Valette. Design, formal wear with hidden blade deployment. But scribbled in the margin was a note. Client returned. Wanted more. Aggressive. Disturbing. Holmes tapped the page. He became obsessed. Returned again and again. What happened to him? He never left. We followed the trail to a small atelier on Rue Saint-Jacques. It had been long abandoned, its windows shuttered, the signage faded to dust. Inside, we found only one thing of note. A mirror. Just like the one at Moreau's studio. And on it, scrawled in red chalk, the pattern is set. When we returned to London, Holmes was quiet. Reflective. He spent an entire day studying the original sketches of Moreau, Klein, and Vespertine, laying them side by side like puzzle pieces. And then, he saw it. The design, he said, is incomplete. He turned over the sketch of the midnight blue suit. There's a code in the thread pattern. A cipher. Each stitch represents a letter. And together, he decoded it slowly, with care. A final piece awaits. The serpent returns home. The suit, Holmes said, is meant to be worn. You can't, I said. Holmes, it's madness. But he shook his head. It's invitation. And to end this, we must accept it. The invitation arrived on vellum parchment, sealed with black wax embossed in the shape of a coiled serpent. It was unsigned and bore only a date, time, and location, midnight. July 14th. The glass hall. Where the suit. Holmes studied the seal by lamplight. His brow furrowed, and I could see the storm clouds gathering behind his eyes. It's Vespertime, he said. He's staging a finale. You're not going alone, I insisted. No, Holmes said. Not alone. But I must go as bait. He turned to the suit, the midnight blue jacket with its glinting silver trim, and studied it with cold calculation. We neutralized the lining, I said. Scrubbed it of toxins. Tested it 6 times. He nodded. But it may still be a trap. The danger lies not in the cloth, Watson. It lies in the man who commissioned it. The glass hall was once a greenhouse, reimagined into a ballroom of mirrored walls and latticed iron, nestled deep in the forgotten boroughs east of Whitechapel. It gleamed under the pale moonlight like a crystal tomb. Inside, masked guests milled in silence, moving like shadows through mist. Every one of them wore evening wear of exquisite make. Designs I recognized from sketches Holmes had found in the Paris atelier. Vespertine's work. They were his audience. Holmes entered alone, clad in the midnight suit, his own mask a simple black satin half-veil. He moved with slow, deliberate elegance. I watched from above, hidden in the gallery loft, revolver at the ready. At the center of the room stood a man in a serpent mask, covered in overlapping silver scales. He turned as Holmes approached. I had hoped you would come, the man said. His voice was smooth, calculated. You fit the suit well. Holmes inclined his head. You must be Vespertine. The man laughed lightly. Names are lies. But if it suits you, yes. Holmes stood still as Vespertine circled him. It was never about the suit, Vespertine said. It was about the idea of it. You don't wear these garments. You become them. The moment Moreau forgot that, he was no longer worthy. You killed him, Holmes said. Of course I did. He betrayed the craft. He began designing for comfort. Luxury. Vespertine's voice grew bitter. I gave him purpose. Danger. Power. But he chose the world over the work. Holmes remained calm. And Greaves. An ambitious insect. He thought he could buy me. I gave him what he deserved. Holmes stepped closer. And now you wish to unmask yourself. Vespertine tilted his head. No, Holmes. I wish to unmask you. He clapped his hands. From the shadows, two masked figures stepped forward. They moved with eerie precision, bearing silver-threaded cuffs and gloves. They are my last commission, Vespertine said. And this is the final walk. Without warning, the two figures lunged. Holmes dodged backward, slipping through the crowd of costumed guests. The masked onlookers did not move. They watched in reverent silence as if this were theater. One attacker swung a blade hidden within a glove seam. Holmes caught the wrist and twisted, sending the figure to the ground. The other came from behind, arms extended like shears. Holmes dropped low, rolling beneath a table and flipping it behind him. From above, I raised my revolver, but Holmes caught my eye and shook his head. He wanted to end this his way. Vespertine stood still, watching as Holmes disarmed the second attacker with a flick of his cufflink, the hidden latch revealing a thread cutter. He turned to face his foe. The crowd parted. "Bravo," Vespertine whispered. "Now, let's see if the suit chose you." He removed his own coat, revealing a tight-fitted vest lined with mirrored scales. Then, he leapt. The fight was unlike any I'd seen. It was not brute strength, it was choreography. Every motion, every parry, was stitched in advance by hands that knew every thread of their opponent's garment. Holmes's jacket tore at the shoulder. Vespertine's sleeve split at the seam. Needles flicked from cuffs. Blades danced from buttons. At last, Holmes dodged a feint and plunged a pin, no larger than a toothpick, into Vespertine's collar. The man staggered. "What have you, or a touch of your own poison?" Holmes said. "Diluted." "Just enough." Vespertine swayed, then dropped to his knees. "I made you beautiful," he gasped. "No," Holmes whispered. "You made yourself monstrous." Vespertine's head fell. The room fell into silence. And then, one by one, the guests began to clap. Scotland Yard arrived too late, of course. By the time Inspector Lestrade and his men flooded the glass hall, Vespertine was already gone, taken by Klein, who vanished once more into the wind. Holmes returned to Baker Street and removed the suit with careful, surgical precision. He folded it, sealed it in a lead-lined trunk, and slid it beneath the floorboards. "No one will wear it again," he said. "But it's over, isn't it?" I asked. He paused. "For now." Outside, the rain fell in fine, silver lines, threading the city in quiet mourning. And somewhere beneath the cobblestones, the serpent slumbered once more. In the days that followed the masquerade, Holmes seemed unsettled. He took no cases. He slept only in brief, haunted intervals. The suit remained hidden, sealed away beneath the floorboards like a dangerous relic. But it was clear to me that something lingered, something that Vespertine had said, or left unsaid. "Holmes," I asked one morning over tea, "what troubles you?" He looked up from the newspaper slowly, as if roused from a deep fog. "Klein never said who made the final modifications to the suit," he said. "Someone rethreaded it. Changed the cipher. That was not Vespertine's hand." "You think someone else is involved?" Holmes nodded. "I think Vespertine was a pawn." With my reluctant assistance, Holmes unearthed the suit again. He turned it inside out, scanning the lining beneath a polarized lens. The threads, woven with metallic filaments, shimmered like scales under the light. "There," he said, pointing to a section near the collar. A secondary code. It was unlike the first, more mathematical than symbolic. After 3 hours of calculation, Holmes sat back in his chair. "It's a name." "Whose?" "Not Klein. Not Vespertine." He hesitated. "It says Delphine. Delphine Moreau. Sister to Louis. Disowned. Forgotten." Holmes had only mentioned her once, in a whisper. She was the better of the two, he had said long ago. But she was unstable. Removed from the Design Guild for nonconformity. Why would she re-emerge now? I asked. Holmes stood and began pacing. Because Vespertine didn't kill Moreau. She did. Vespertine was merely the scalpel. Delphine was the hand. But why? To reclaim her legacy. To finish what she began. Holmes stopped. And she's not done. 2 days later, Lestrade arrived with news of a new victim. A judge, found dead in his chambers, strangled by his own ceremonial robe. Any sign of intrusion? Holmes asked. Lestrade shook his head. None. But the robe's hem had been altered. Double-stitched. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Any strange fibers? Black silk. Wound with silver. Holmes closed his eyes. She's begun her next act. A second murder followed the next night. An opera singer, found unstaged during rehearsal, her corset cinched to lethal tightness. Again, the signature. Black silk, silver thread. She's sending a message, Holmes said. But what does it mean? She's demonstrating control. One garment at a time. Holmes tracked Delphine's trail through the underworld of London's forgotten tailors, names that had once graced Savile Row and vanished into ruin. At last, we found her atelier. It was hidden beneath a boarded hat shop in Clerkenwell. We entered through a rusted cellar door. Inside, it was madness sewn into form. Walls covered in sketches of garments fused with weaponry, mannequins with steel spines, journals filled with coded designs. At the center stood a cloak on a headless form. Its lining shimmered like oil. Holmes examined it. "It's not a garment," he said. "It's a map." I looked closer, symbols, measurements, and coordinates hidden in the threading. It leads to somewhere. A final stage. The coordinates brought us to an abandoned theatre south of the Thames, the Gallows Gallery. Once a venue for macabre plays, it had long since fallen into rot. Inside, everything had been prepared. The stage was dressed with mannequins wearing tailored garments from centuries past, each outfitted with threads bearing Delphine's cipher. Each posed in theatrical tableau, a judge, a singer, a soldier, a priest. Holmes moved among them like a conductor preparing an orchestra. Then he stopped. "She's here." And she was. From the shadows behind the curtains, a voice rang out. Deep, husky, unafraid. "You came dressed in the wrong century, brother." Holmes froze. I turned to him. "Brother?" He nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "My sister." I stared at Holmes, stunned. "Your sister?" He didn't respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the silhouette stepping from behind the curtain, slim, composed, and unmistakably familiar in movement. Delphine Moreau. She wore a gown woven from glistening midnight velvet, stitched so finely that it appeared to ripple as she walked. Her hair was drawn back, her face untouched by age, but her eyes, they were Holmes's eyes. Sharper, perhaps. Wilder. "You were never supposed to find me, Sherlock," she said, with a faint Parisian lilt. "But I see you haven't lost your taste for theatrics." "And you haven't lost your thirst for vengeance," Holmes replied, his voice low. Delphine smiled. "Vengeance?" "No. Only justice. The kind that does not wear wigs or robes, but thread and blade." Holmes stepped forward, slow and careful. "You orchestrated the murders," he said, "using Vespertine as your mask. You killed Louis." "He stole my designs," Delphine said. "Our family disowned me. But Louis wore my work like it was his birthright. When I returned to Paris, I found him bathing in accolades meant for me." Her fingers curled slightly. "So I silenced him." "What about Greaves?" Holmes asked. The judge, the singer, what did they do to deserve death? They were patrons of indulgence, she said coldly. They turned the sacred craft of tailoring into a marketplace of mediocrity. And what of the suit? Holmes asked. The serpent was my masterwork. I designed it when I was 17. Louis feared it, said it was madness. Vespertine loved it, worshipped it, but he lacked the discipline to wield it. Holmes's eyes darkened. You've turned genius into genocide. Delphine tilted her head. And you turned silence into loyalty. Holmes removed his coat and stepped onto the stage. It ends tonight, he said. Delphine nodded. Of course it does. I've prepared your final role. She snapped her fingers. From behind the velvet curtain came two figures, automatons, human-shaped, clothed in masterful imitations of Holmes's own wardrobe, but with arms that clicked like insect limbs. They are not actors, she said. They are needles made flesh. I raised my pistol, but Holmes lifted a hand. No, Watson. He faced the constructs. They're wearing your designs, he said. Yes, Delphine replied. As you should have. The first automaton lunged, striking like a thresher. Holmes ducked, rolling between its legs and slicing its hamstring with a seam ripper from his cuff link. The machine groaned, stumbled, and collapsed. The second moved with greater speed, adapting with unnerving precision. It copied Holmes's own footwork, his stance, his rhythm. Do you see? Delphine called. Even your style was stitched from me. Your logic, your coldness, your calculations, they're not Father's legacy. They're mine. Holmes didn't respond. Instead, he pivoted, used the stage rigging to hoist himself into the catwalk, then swung down, landing directly behind the automaton. A single stab into the base of its neck deactivated it. Silence fell, except for Delphine's breath. She stepped forward. I didn't want this to be war, she said. Only acknowledgement. You, the prodigal son. Me, the discarded daughter. We could have ruled the world of design. We were never meant to rule it, Holmes said. Only understand it. I understand it perfectly, she said. Holmes took a step toward her. I know what they did to you. Father cast you out when you refused the guild's traditions. You disappeared into France and re-emerged as myth. But you are not forgotten. Delphine's eyes flickered. You kept my name, she whispered. In my own thread journal, he said. Every design I ever sketched, every insight, I credited ODM for you. A long silence. Then she said, quietly, but you never came for me. Holmes's voice was low. I was afraid. Of me? No. Of what I would become if I followed you. She stood still. I slowly stepped beside Holmes, watching Delphine's hands. She reached into her coat and removed a small stiletto. I raised my pistol. "No," Holmes said. Delphine offered the blade to him, hilt first. "Finish your pattern, brother." Holmes did not take it. Instead, he reached forward and embraced her. For a second, the air trembled. Then she collapsed in his arms. Her breath was shallow. I rushed forward. Holmes pulled back her sleeve. Thread marks embedded in the skin, needle points infected with her own engineered venom. "She always had to wear her truth," Holmes said softly. "Even to the end." We carried her body out together as dawn broke over the theater. It was a quiet morning when we brought her back to Baker Street. Holmes refused to let the constabulary take her. "She was my blood," he said simply. "She will not be reduced to a footnote." Delphine Moreau, tailor, architect, murderer, was buried beneath a grey marble marker under a false name. Holmes chose the epitaph himself, a mind that wove what others dared not imagine. For days afterward, he scarcely spoke. He neither ate nor read. He merely sat by the fire with her thread journal in his lap, fingers tracing the embossed DM on the cover. The silence was heavy with memory. "She was always the more brilliant," he said at last. "But brilliance alone, it does not anchor the soul." I was not idle during those days. The suit, the Serpent, was dismantled, every component catalogued. Lestrade arrived twice with officials from the Home Office. They wanted the technology, naturally. Holmes refused. If they unlock the language of those threads, he told them, they will learn how to weave death, not cloth. Eventually, they relented. I burned the core wiring myself. A week later, Holmes summoned me. His eyes were sharp again, though rimmed with the weight of sleeplessness. "She left behind more than vengeance," he said. He opened Delphine's thread journal, not to the sketches, but the final pages. There, in fine black ink, was a full manuscript, the seamstress's hypothesis. It was not a confession. It was a theory of perception, of deception, of tailoring not just garments, but events. She believed the world was stitched by narrative, Holmes said. That if one could shape the language of appearance, one could control reality itself. It was absurd and brilliant, and, in a strange way, deeply sad. Holmes took up his violin again. Not to perform, but to write, his notes etched in sound, his sorrow disguised in tone. And I, for my part, wrote as well. But I did not publish it. Not this story. It was too personal, too intimate. Instead, I locked the manuscript in a box marked simply "The Serpent." Years passed. The memory of Delphine faded from the public mind. Vespertine's name was spoken only in whispered regret, and Savile Row returned to its tailored silence. But Holmes, he never returned to tailoring. "I cannot wear invention without hearing her breath behind it," he said once. It was 5 years later when we received the letter. No stamp. No address. Just 2 initials, DM. The handwriting was unmistakable. "It's not possible," I said. Holmes stared at the note, then opened it. Inside was a swatch of black silk, threaded with silver and gold. A single line stitched into its edge, "You buried Delphine. But you never buried the pattern." Holmes looked at me, then said, quietly, "It's begun again." The letter had no return address, no fingerprint, no scent, no error in syntax. It was, Holmes admitted, the most precise forgery I've ever seen. And it haunted him, not just for what it said, but for what it implied. Delphine, buried in a grave of silence, had been resurrected by her own design. Or, more dangerously, by someone determined to carry on her legacy. "We're not dealing with an imitator," Holmes said the next morning. "We're dealing with a disciple." Following the fabric's trace led us to a small tailors' guild in Lyon known as Le Cercle du Fuseau. The Spindle Club. Once little more than a collective of student artisans, it had recently acquired mysterious patrons and exponential funding. Their new emblem? A black serpent stitched with a gold eye. Holmes and I travelled under false names, presenting ourselves as researchers in Victorian tailoring. Inside the atelier, I felt unease in every corner. The silence was practiced. The light too dim. The apprentices moved with unnatural synchronicity, as though they answered not to a teacher, but to a signal. At the center of the guild's private chamber was a glass case. Within it, mounted on dark velvet, was the serpent suit. Or rather, its replica. "They've rebuilt it," Holmes whispered. "And possibly improved it," I added, noting the faint lines of copper wiring along the spine. We spent the night in a local inn, reviewing what little we had gathered. "The embroidery work matches Delphine's original pattern," Holmes said. "But the language has evolved. See this?" He showed me a magnified sketch of the lining. "These aren't design notes. They're coordinates. Timestamps. Movements. For what? For people." Holmes sat back. "They've created predictive tailoring. Meaning. They're tailoring events, Watson, not just suits." The following morning, Holmes disguised himself as a blind Italian button-maker and infiltrated the guild's lower ranks. I remained behind, reluctantly, posing as a cloth merchant from Kent. He returned after midnight, pale and silent. "Well?" I asked. He sat by the window, staring out at the moon. "There's someone else," he said finally. A designer they refer to only as Epine, the thorn. Delphine student. No, Holmes said. Her child. I blinked. She had no, she did, Holmes interrupted. And she raised them in silence, hidden behind veils and metaphors. They are the mind behind this resurrection. And they intend to launch the suit on a world stage. The venue was already chosen, the Grand Lumiere, a fashion exposition in Berlin attended by royalty, financiers, and luminaries in design. And on the second night, Epine's finale would be unveiled, a living model wearing the serpent. They're going to activate it, Holmes said. Demonstrate it. Weaponize it. We had less than 5 days. Using contacts in Prussian intelligence, Holmes secured passes to the exposition. I played the part of a foreign textile investor. Holmes, my mute assistant. From the moment we stepped into the grand hall, we saw signs of the serpent's evolution. Silver threads laced into the lighting rig. Drapery folds hiding signal emitters. Models walking not just in rhythm, but in code. Holmes stopped by a mannequin display and whispered, "This is no longer tailoring. This is programming." Then we found the model. Tall, androgynous, eyes glazed with a pale film. They did not blink. Their arms bore tiny lattice scars. Evidence of surgical thread insertion. "I don't think they're aware of what they're wearing," I whispered. "They're not," Holmes replied. "They've been tailored from the inside out." On the night of the final show, Holmes executed the most delicate sabotage I had ever seen. He rerouted the power that controlled the suit's core thread conductor and restitched 2 lines in the collar with his own cipher, a command that, when activated, would seize the suit's motion mid-step. And then, just before the model took the runway, he placed a note in Epine's dressing room: "Your mother walked alone. You walk blind. Meet me beneath the stage, and I will show you the last thread." Beneath the stage of the Grand Lumiere, among the cables and hydraulic lifts, stood a figure in shadows. Epine. They wore a coat of pure obsidian wool, faceless beneath a sculpted black veil. Even their breath seemed measured, controlled, like the pulse of a machine. "I knew you would come," they said, voice neither male nor female, only deliberate. "My mother said you were incapable of leaving a pattern incomplete." Holmes stepped from the opposite corridor, silent as a shadow. "And she was right," he replied. "You buried her like a criminal," Epine said. "I buried her with honor," Holmes said. "She died to protect you." "No," Epine said. "She died because of you." They drew from their coat a long tailoring needle, not a weapon, but a conductor wand. "She left me her knowledge, her technique, her pain." "And what did you do with it?" Holmes asked softly. "I gave it purpose," Epine replied. "Fashion is no longer an indulgence. It is structure, precision, power. You turned art into dominion, Holmes said. I tailored a future, Epine answered. The fashion show above thundered with applause. Soon, the final model would step into view, wearing the living suit, a fusion of Delphine's genius and Epine's ambition. Holmes had but minutes. I do not wish to fight you, Holmes said. Because you would lose. Epine asked. No, Holmes replied. Because you are not my enemy. You are her child. Epine stepped closer. The world broke her, they said. I will weave it back together. By turning people into patterns. By controlling what chaos cannot. Holmes opened his palm. Then choose, he said. This needle, your mother's final one, or the stage above. In his hand lay a final swatch of silk, encoded with Delphine's handwriting. Her last design. Epine trembled. Above, the lights dimmed. The crowd silenced. The serpent suit strode onto the runway, its living wearer held aloft by an invisible rhythm. Then, at the sixth step, it stopped. Frozen. The crowd gasped. The lights flickered. A hush swept through the grand hall. Holmes had activated his cipher. And Epine was still below. Epine stared at the cloth. She never showed this to me. She wrote it after Berlin was selected, Holmes said. She feared what you would do with the suit. So she created a counter-stitch. A release code. One that could only be triggered if you looked beneath the beauty. Epine's fingers gripped the silk. She wanted to protect me. Holmes nodded. I never knew she loved me, Epine whispered. She loved you more than herself, Holmes said. That's why she let you believe she died alone. A pause. Then Epine whispered, will you turn me in? No, Holmes turned away. But you must choose. Walk back into the world as a shadow, or step onto the stage as yourself. Epine walked the runway. They removed the veil. The crowd froze. The suit glowed with refracted color, not weaponized, but alive with motion, like an aurora stitched into silk. They spoke only one line, this was my mother's final design. The audience erupted, not in confusion, but in awe. Not domination, but transformation. We left Berlin the next day. Holmes sat silently in the train cabin, the final silk swatch in hand. You saved them, I said. He shook his head. No. They saved themselves. Back at Baker Street, we received a final note. The pattern is at peace. I will not forget either of you. I am learning to tailor the soul, not the skin. E. Holmes folded the letter. He turned to the fireplace. Then, with deliberate care, he placed the letter into his thread journal, between the pages marked Delphine Moreau, and closed it. forever.